hopefully they don't end up, hopefully after that they end up just saying, you know what, we don't need a government altogether. It's not going to happen, especially with something that I've noticed with the yellow vests.
Yeah.
It started off as simply a movement, to try and reject the new carbon tax. But I've seen, their
Hey there. So, for those of you who aren't aware, I, Filthy Heretic, and Hoplu, since around August of 2018, have hosted a stream series known as Cool Capitalist Kids. Edgy name aside, every episode we try and dig up the most obscure but important stories which even alternative media outlets don't seem to want to cover. Such as that one time when documents leaked showing that for 30 years the FDA bred kittens and infected them with a brain-eating parasite that affected their behavior for the purpose of experimenting with the effects of mind control and how it can be applied to humans, then threw them inside of incinerators after they bred and passed the parasite. Or in yesterday's episode, where a young girl who was being owned in Tennessee as a child sex slave killed her master, and then was arrested and sentenced to 51 years in prison for it. Basically, if you aren't already an anarchist, this podcast is the last step from minarchy to anarchy. But we also provide our own takes on each individual story that we cover, of course, so we tend to cover stories that get mainstream press as well, but we provide our own unique takes on it more often than not, and apparently there's a group of people who don't like that. Last night on the stream, we were beginning to talk about the yellow vests and what's going on in French politics. Well, we started talking about France's police brutality and how the media wasn't covering the videos which came out of what French police are doing to people. I can't even show most of the videos on here because my channel would immediately get a terms of service strike. We're talking people getting whipped in the face with chains and their eyes popping out of their sockets. So, on top of going over that, I also began to get into why I don't think protest movements are necessarily an effective means of achieving political change. And right after I started getting into specifics, the stream goes down. Alright. A bit weird upon first inspection, but perhaps it's just a coincidence. Well, a few minutes later, once Hoplu got his internet connection back online again, he was able to confirm that this was indeed a DDoS attack. So, for those who are unaware, a DDoS, or Digital Denial of Service, is an attempt on the part of an outside series of sources to overwhelm a network-based online connection by flooding the servers or network in question with data packets, resulting in the victim essentially being forced offline. And this happened right as I started talking about the problems with protest movements, specifically how they tend to be subverted by actors hired by NGOs or directly by government-funded agencies from within and completely changing the aims of the groups in question from what they used to be in order to alienate the people who started. A few examples of single-interest protest movements provided were Occupy Wall Street, originally being a movement to oppose the subsidizing of businesses by the state following the subprime mortgage crisis of 2008, being turned into a social justice and communist movement after Soros groups started paying actors to appear on television and push anti-free market propaganda. Or how the Tea Party movement had absolutely nothing to do with any sort of political ideology at first, and started initially as a protest movement in response to the findings of the 9/11 Commission report, specifically that it omitted several crucial pieces of information, was deliberately underfunded, and all of the key figures who were in question testified in executive sessions, which is essentially another way of saying that it was off the record with no witnesses. In fact, the reason it's called the Tea Party movement is because it started off with throwing a giant copy of the 9/11 Commission report into the Boston Harbor on December 16th, 2006. So my point was simply this, that you have a similar thing starting to happen with the Yellow Vests. You have a protest movement created in response to growing taxation in France, now seemingly being co-opted by progressives and socialists trying to turn it essentially into just another Occupy Wall Street, except this time it makes even less sense because the progressive actors are advocating for the very things which started the protest in the first place. And this gets even stranger when you have Macron calling these people terrorists and thugs until this quote-unquote manifesto starts circling around, and all of a sudden Macron now decides to go along with the protesters' demands with no resistance. I didn't even say definitively that the movement had been co-opted by NGO-paid actors, only that this sort of thing has happened before numerous times, that this is starting to share some eerie similarities to how Occupy Wall Street was co-opted, and that for this, among many other reasons, I don't think protest movements can achieve political change. And because I was going to say that, Hoplu got DDoSed and we lost connection. Because I started explaining this, we were DDoSed. This happened right as I was getting into it, and after we'd been talking about the Yellow Vests for a good minute or so. So clearly, there is a person or group with a decent amount of resources that didn't want our stream to get out, and specifically didn't want me to finish my point. I doubt that it was YouTube, because our stream's been targeted by YouTube before. Our midterm election coverage, where we didn't cover the election and instead live-streamed our reaction to a hilarious Chinese bootleg of Revenge of the Sith, was hit with a copyright strike 10 minutes after we'd started, even though the video we were responding to had been on YouTube since February of 2016. So what organization do you think had enough resources to flood our server with enough requests to pull off a DDoS attack, and doesn't want us talking about the inner workings of the political elite, and specifically how they work to subvert grassroots protest movements? Well, only a handful come to mind, but the fact remains that our tiny stream, which only gets around 50 live viewers per show, apparently scares the fuck out of the political elite to the point where some large organization is going to DDoS us and try and stop us from spreading our message. I don't know about you, but this is completely unacceptable. How about we try and spread the word as far and wide as we can despite them? And this comes just barely a week after I exposed that general principles company of flooding my video on the borderline shootings dislikes and comment section with a bunch of bot accounts on behalf of some bigger organization. So I've got paid disinformation campaigns being created to discredit my content, and I've got people DDoSing the podcast I co-host to take us offline. Makes you think, doesn't it? Especially considering my few thousand subscribers, and even though for channels of our size 50 live viewers is a lot, not a whole lot of viewers. Seems like a large amount of effort is being put into specifically trying to stop the spread of our ideas, our observations, and our arguments. Please, if you support this channel, comment, rate, and subscribe, and make absolutely sure, please, to spread this video around and spread the message. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time.